Wait. And we're live, and you're squished. Fun.
Ah, squished. Oh no! Can we reattach to the existing streams, or are we gonna
I
need to
sure hope
send a new
so.
link?
Sometimes it doesn't. Since we're back live again.
Let's see.
Yeah, it looks like we're good. Yeah, it looks like it's fine. Come on, don't do that. All right. Anyways, I think we're good. I
Yeah, it
think
looks
I
like
think
we're attached.
I think the stream issues are non-issues right now.
Yep,
All right.
I'm
Well,
watching. Yep.
if you're joining us right now, you're watching Eric and I scramble through some late last
Technical
minute
difficulty.
technical issues.
Yeah.
But what this actually is a live stream of us covering the news, specifically the video game industry news. So Eric and I are owners, co-owners of a game tech company. So every week we like to cover the game news, specifically industry news, and we cover it from an industry perspective. So that means like stuff about business changes, strategy changes, marketing, weird stuff. And game industry is full of it. So that's what we cover. Eric,
Yeah.
do you want to start us off, letting the fine folks watching us what they can expect for today's show?
Sure. So on today's Sonic Bloom Live, we are going to be talking about three news items, as we do most weeks. And those items are going to be first, that the Sony PS5 sales have had a slowdown in 2022, at least a slowdown relative to the originally announced expected sales numbers. And we'll discuss that. The second topic is that FIFA is breaking up with EA, or yeah, I think it's that way. That either way, EA and FIFA are splitting, so you're no longer going to have FIFA games be exclusively developed by EA. We'll get into the details there. And then finally, over this past weekend, Xbox Series X and Series S players, possibly others, encountered many players encountered issues with not being able to play their games due to Microsoft having an outage of some of their DRM servers, validation servers. And there's we're going to discuss that, what it means for Microsoft, what it means for users, and potential things that could be done to improve the state of DRM play in the industry going forward. So with that, Justin, you want to lead us into our first topic?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first topic that we're going to cover today is a little issue that Sony kind of made note of. Basically, I think Sony provides a financial report for their year end, which ends in March 20. Well, this year was March 2022. Next year will be March 2023, but it's for the past fiscal year. So we're in their fiscal year 2022, which began in March. They had an end of year quarterly report making note of how the PlayStation was performing. In that report, they managed to miss their projected targets for the year for PlayStation. Basically, it's manufacturing. It's PlayStation sold to retail outlets, but not necessarily sold to consumers. Although at this point, given the way things are, I don't think there's
Basically,
any.
they're the same.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's sold but not on store shelves is just on a month lagging indicator, because they manufacture them, they get sold to a retailer, and then they're sitting somewhere in transport, ready to be stocked on shelves.
Or in a van by some scalper
Or that, right?
waiting to
It fell off the
be.
back of this truck.
Oh,
Yeah.
put it in the back of my truck.
I'm really surprised like there's not more targeted piracy, but I guess like water piracy,
Yeah, oh,
like
yeah, sure,
trying to
sure.
commandeer large shipping vessels. But yeah, all that said, that's what we'll be talking about. What's of note and interesting is what exactly is happening here. I think there's been a lot of murmuring about why Sony's a bit further behind than the other manufacturers, but I'm not sure it's quite as simple as that. Eric, do you want to go over some of the details, or do you want me to cover them?
I'll toss in the ones that I'm aware of, and you can add some spice as you see fit. Basically, Sony had again fell short of their projections by about 3 million units. They cite that this was sort of supply chain issues, which indicates that they had believed earlier in the year that they were going to be able to secure through their partners enough parts to build whatever the original 19.3 however many million units in the fiscal year 2022 that they were had planned out. That apparently didn't seem to be the case. Partway through the year, they had some adjusted forecasts based on those numbers that they were getting in their own internal, math, working with their supply partners. And then that happened again just recently, where this is happening. So the headline of PS5 sales slowing down is not so much that, it's more that PS5 manufacturing has had to slow down.
Yeah.
Compared to their actual goal. Sony, to be clear, wants to make many more consoles because every PS5 owner who has to wait is money that they are not getting.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad because basically the demand is not being met by the supply.
Right.
In this case, especially, the 3 million shortcoming is kind of strange. Like, they don't indicate which piece of hardware is the bottleneck here. Presumably, it's the silicon, like it's the SoC.
It could also be something entirely ridiculous, that there's some random part on the motherboard that is like benign in general, but like other people bid into it, or the company who normally manufactures it decided that they were going to go for change their business and their manufacturing allotments for the year to something that's more lucrative for them.
Right.
And now Sony's left in the lurch. Like, I
mean, there could be any number of reasons. I think there's been a lot of speculation online that it's something with the way that they develop their SoC that makes it more likely to fail, though I don't see how that would be. Like, the manufacturing methods that they're implementing, I don't think are particularly onerous or unpredictable at this point. Where they would have like a 3 million shortcoming on their yields. So yeah, I mean, it's probably something that, like, a component shortage or some part that they use specially that the manufacturer just failed to make time to mass produce that for Sony, and therefore cause them to miss their target by 3 million.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost assume if it were something like that, I have no insider information. I don't know the details here, but I imagine that they're built, the PS5 SoCs are built in the same fabrication plants as the Series X and Series S SoCs, because AMD is building them both.
I mean, I'm almost certain it's using some Taiwanese fabricator that everybody else uses. It's just a matter of how much time can they get, in the fabrication.
Right,
slots.
but if there were problems, like, as far as I am aware, and I could be wrong about this, but the Xbox Series X and Series S chips are distinct enough that they're not necessarily, as I understand it, they're not necessarily just different binning, right? Like, oh, we couldn't activate X cores on the Xbox Series X chip, so we'll mark it as an Xbox Series S chip.
Yeah, I think we had originally speculated that was the case, but it turns out, the silicon and the design is actually wholly different.
Right. So you have the Xbox Series X chip, the Series S chip, and then you have the PS5 chip, which are all RDNA2 graphics on there from AMD. Presumably, they're also an AMD CPU, all in the same kind of package. Those are probably one would presume, without any insider details, that they run on a similar fabrication process and all this other stuff. So if Sony was being so hit on the SoC package, perhaps Microsoft, it wouldn't be much of a leap to suggest that Microsoft would be hitting a similar problem. They don't appear to be. according to their announcement. They also aren't announcing any sales figures. I think I read something last week or a few days ago where Microsoft had claimed that they're winning the generation so far without citing any numbers. It was just like, we're winning. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what Microsoft's metric is for winning.
Yeah, exactly.
And because they do not announce numbers like that, the last number that we know of, which came from a report not that long ago, is that they had sold through 12 million units. Sony right now is at
Well,
19.5 million units.
yeah, and the 12.5 is just projections based on people who have contacts in the major retailer space throughout the globe, presumably. They're looking at supply chain and other stuff. Yeah.
I mean, and not only that, is it unclear what it breaks down between. Is it between like what's the difference between X and Series S boxes that they, how does that 12 million split? And we don't none of that information is really known. What we do know is that they've had significantly more growth in that period of time than Sony does, and I think that's how they claim that they're winning, because they've seen larger growth than Sony has in the same period. A lot of that is due to Game Pass growth, which without a doubt they provide a better product there in terms of service, and it's also a service that is agnostic of actual owning an Xbox. So, they can claim a lot of things that are not fair comparisons. I think if you look at console sales,
hardware sales,
console hardware sales, that they're not. Sony's exceeding what they're doing, likely. Sell-through numbers look lower than what Sony's providing. And Sony is still not able to meet their demand. I think Series S consoles have been able to be found in stores for quite some time at this point.
Yep.
It doesn't really, it's all speculation. It doesn't really tell you much.
Right.
I guess the only good news that comes out of this is that they are expecting to ship 18 million units this year. That's up until March 2023 to meet demand, which will put them at, whatever.
Almost 40 million.
Yeah, almost 40 million, 38 million, whatever it was. For between that period of time. So, good news for people who want to get it, I guess.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah.
I don't think they would be announcing it's usually you want to announce a number that you're pretty confident you can hit or exceed. And
it's not, it's like Sony's manufacturing this sort of, like, they should know where they're going to make it this year, because they already put in the order for all the components that they need. That should already be set in stone outside of some major interruption where one of their suppliers fail to meet the demands. So they should have already secured the components that they need for producing 18 million units this year. So that likely is accurate, barring some weird event that prevents that from happening.
Well, we back up a year. We could have said that exact thing about whatever the numbers were, and they fell short by 3 million. So
yeah, and it's probably
we don't know
a legitimate, like, something one of their suppliers failed to meet components by 3 million or whatever it is. Yeah.
These things happen. The fingers are crossed because it clearly since it's still selling out, people still want to buy it so they can play games. And the industry will do better for providing gamers with the capability of playing the games. So
and I'd like to think this is probably the last year we'll be seeing the sort of focus on cross-gen games. I think after God of War Ragnarok, which is supposed to come out this year, no future games have claimed that they're going to be cross-gen.
Yeah, I actually saw a headline. I can't remember the game, but there was a headline where it said that some game that was coming out soon was actually Xbox One, PS4 only. Like, presumably it would run on an Xbox Series console and the PS5 in backwards compatibility mode. I wish I knew what title that was, but
are you reversing it?
I am. No. I'm specifically stating that's why it piqued my interest, because they were like, we're specifically not releasing this on current gen consoles. It's like
only on last gen consoles.
Only on last gen, yeah. Today, it's like what are we, 2 years into the current gen console? It's like, wow, okay,
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, I can see a point in that. But as of yesterday or a couple of days ago, Warner Brothers showed off Arkham Knights, which dropped the last gen entirely, and they said, "Hey, we're only doing PS5 and Xbox Series X." Although that looks not because they look behind in their development. They're supposed to release this year. The development looks a little bit far behind, and it's probably easier to have a game that was targeted for PS4, PS5, and say, okay, well, we can't do the performance tweaking that we'd like to, so just put a PS5, cap it at whatever 30 frames per second or 40 frames per second, and call it a
Yeah,
day.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
It looks like I might have actually had that sort of reversed, in that because of a confusing headline. I don't know. I can't find the article I was reading, but or the headline that I had seen, but it stuck up in my memory because of it was like, what? Wow, two
yeah.
years in, and you're sticking with last gen. Cool. I mean, to an extent, it makes sense, right? Like, how many PS4s are out there? Like 90 plus million, and then
Yeah,
PS5s. We know it's like
114, I
19.
think.
Yeah, versus 19 million PS5s. Like, yeah, it would be cool to release to combine, well, with a little bit of crossover. Imagine 120 million consoles. That's why people do that cross-gen stuff, by the way. Like, because
Yeah,
games are expensive to build, and if you can target a much broader user base, then that means your overall
I,
addressable market is
I would just
larger.
find it weird that you wouldn't release a PS5 version, even if it was a garbage
Yeah,
PS5 version. Would basically say, "Hey, I made it for PS4. It runs at 30 frames per second. We run it on PS5, and
same
on
graphics,
the
but it runs,
right, exactly. We
a
can
higher
we
frame rate.
can run the higher frame rate or higher resolution at the same frame rate,
Yeah,
whatever it is, and release it there with just basically new packaging and
yeah,
some minor tweaks." I'd find it much stranger that, like in the case of Arkham Knights, like I think they're targeting PS5 and Series X only, not because it's a good opportunity for them, but because they don't have the time uh, to do the performance tweaking to get it to run properly on PS4 and all the like the SKUs on that, and just say like cut our losses and just do it on PS5.
yeah. For those who don't understand, it's not just like I can find the place in the code to optimize to make this routine run 20 times faster. It's like dealing with the situation where you need to get the disk speeds. You have to package your content in a specific way and duplicate assets. This is the whole thing with Mark Cerny's talk about the PS5 and why a ridiculously fast disk is useful. But like having the content be packaged in a way that like you can stream it in to get to reach the CPU in a fast way where you don't have to seek across the Blu-ray if you're running off of the disk, or even a spinning metal hard drive, which is very, very slow. Um, Both of those disk formats are very, very slow in terms of how a CPU needs to process stuff. So, we're not just talking about like, oh, the code's slow or the rendering is heavy. It's literally generally like assets, the size of the assets and the time it takes to move that data around to different parts of the machine.
Right. Like it's
Yeah.
actually if you develop for current gen and you're trying to make something run on past gen, the ask is actually much bigger versus if you start development there. Now it looks like they actually started development on PS4, but they probably at
Yeah.
some point in the past 2 years said, "Hey, let's focus on the PS5," and probably running up to a crunch. They're saying like, "We're not going to do performance optimization to get this to run properly on PS4, so we'll just cut our losses."
Right. And it has been my experience in the games industry that games, all the games that I've worked on in the games industry, generally the editors are run on Windows and or Mac, and the game therefore runs on Windows and or Mac in a specialized environment. And when it comes time to build or print a disc, you have to go through extra work to make sure that it will run on the disc on the console. So you get a dev kit and you shift those bits onto the dev kit. Sometimes you like create a copy. Dev kits usually have an extra hard drive that allows you to write so that you're not burning a disk every time. But you can basically copy the executable over, and that's still going to be faster than reading from a disk. But you can then go into disk emulation mode in some dev kits and run it as though it will operate as though it's running from a disk. And then you'll start to see massive slowdown, hitches, bugs where the game is breaking because it's taking way too long to load and it needs to like go fetch from a disk when it wasn't expecting to. And when you run and you're building and iterating on your PC, you don't have to worry about that because your hard drive is massive and you're probably running on an SSD anyway. So like a lot of these bottlenecks are gone in the PC space.
Yeah.
So it can be, once they started to say like the scope of this game is huge, and then people were dreading the process of saying it's going to cost us so much money to spend the time to make this work on the Xbox, the original Xbox One and the original PlayStation 4, and then all the versions on top of that. Like they probably pitched the publisher, WB Games in this case, and said, can we just target it'll cost us way less. Like, yes, we'll probably make less money because it won't hit all the old consoles, but it'll look better and it'll cost you less to build.
Yeah.
So that's the trade-off. Anyway, we've gone off the course a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's much more to talk about in terms of PlayStation. It's speculation beyond trying to figure out why exactly they lost 3 million, where they're short by 3 million units.
Yeah.
We're not going to know that. They're not going to make that stuff known. I think the most interesting part is that you can expect 18 million units this year. It's going from March, and they have a total of 19.3 million units sold worldwide, which is pretty good. It's just I think they're short of the PS4 sell-through rate at this point in time.
Yeah, it might be.
But the PS4 was also a much more tame console in comparison for the time that they were released.
Yep.
So
I mean, heck, actually, one of the parts that could be a delay here is something related to the disk drive.
yeah, I mean, it's any number of things. So
The flash memory, or having lower yields than expected, or the like the super speedy flash memory, or even the compression chips, right? They have a custom compression chip on their motherboard to handle how the data is automatically compressed when sent to disk. And they have these, it's a complex pipeline, and it's possible that a lot goes wrong there in the supply chain. So,
yeah.
Well, it's all speculation. This is things that could happen. We don't know.
Yep. All right, well, let's not move on to the next topic with the FIFA information coming from EA. Do you want to cover that?
Yeah, sure. I'll dig into it. So FIFA, the sort of International Football Association, I don't remember what it actually stands for, but it's soccer for us Americans. They are the sort of association behind organizing the World Cup, as I understand it, and running that. They're also the ones who clearly have the FIFA brand and control that, and therefore control who gets to label their games as FIFA, the video games. They basically license the name out. That comes with certain abilities, probably access to certain football players and whatnot. For purposes of football, I should say players and teams and managers and that kind of thing. In this case, in the games industry, EA has had an exclusive license to make games with the FIFA brand for about 30 years. And that is changing as of this year. I think they got an extension. EA got an extension, a non-exclusive extension for the year 2022. So the 2022 year is going to continue the FIFA. It's FIFA 22. It's going to continue with the brand under EA. Presumably, since it's non-exclusive, we could see another FIFA branded title come from another studio. But given how late it is right now, probably something smaller,
maybe a mobile title, something like that.
Right? Yeah, something that's not like the EA's version of FIFA has 700 teams, 100 stadiums, and 19,000 players.
Yeah.
That is a lot of data, and they're able to do that because they take their yearly release, and they'll take the game, release it, and then start immediately working on the next year's title and revamping and updating assets that they have already started with, and finding ways to make improvements as they go. Add new modes, that kind of thing. But they've built up a library of content that they can stick in their games that someone starting afresh would have to produce from nothing,
Yep.
presumably.
Uh,
So yeah, go ahead.
well, to add to that, so FIFA's or EA's last FIFA game will be in 2023. It'll be FIFA 2023, which might release in 22. I'm not sure exactly how their release cadence works.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the whole thing came down to is that and the New York Times reports that EU is paying $150 million per year to FIFA to license their name. FIFA or EA also licenses with all the teams, the stadiums, and players individually to figure out or to be able to use likenesses and team names and logos and all this other stuff. So EA has to be able to make money on it, and they probably pay a ton of money in just straight licenses. Clearly, it's been fine for them because they continue to make it. If it was a money loss for them, they probably wouldn't do it. But apparently, FIFA was asking for $1 billion for a 4-year period for the World Cup, which is what FIFA directly oversees. And I think this is when EA is like, no, this is not happening.
Right.
And they decide to cut their losses at this point.
To be clear, that ups the price from 150 million a year to 250 million a year.
Yeah.
On average. So EA FIFA was demanding effectively a 66% increase in licensing fees for using the brand.
Yeah, and I think EA said probably thought to itself like, for the core of the game, which is football, soccer game, whatever you want to call it, soccer games competing against known teams. Everything but calling it the World Cup and having the FIFA branding on that is already covered. So having an FC based game, which is the name of their new soccer game going into 2024, will be called EA Sports FC, football club, whichever way you want to put it. But they can basically do the same thing without having to put down $1 billion every 4 years to do FIFA's branded World Cup. And it seems that EA is confident enough that they won't lose much of their player base in those games, because the game itself is probably what people care about more than the specific branding on it. I guess time will tell, but it's kind of brazen of FIFA to think that they can demand as much as they're demanding and not see some kind of recourse from the publisher who's like, no, we're not doing this. So do you have any thoughts on this? Anything of interest?
Not particularly of interest, I guess. I think this is overall a good thing for the industry. I so I remember back in my day, when EA got the exclusive license to NFL content, we lost a lot of the fascinating sort of one-upsmanship that was happening. To me, as an outsider who wasn't terribly interested in NFL games other than playing a couple with friends occasionally, there was a period where I'd actually pay attention to them and say, like, okay, well, what does NFL Game Day have versus Madden NFL versus whatever the Sega one was, NFL 2K. Yeah, NFL 2K. Right, and I remember NFL 2K came out and it wowed everybody because that was the first time they were talking about rendering individual fingers on the players. I think it was like Dreamcast.
Yeah, Dreamcast
where it initially launched. Yeah, and that all went away. It all went away when EA announced that they were going to be the exclusive, have exclusive rights to deal with NFL brands and teams. Now, I think EA would have gone 100% with FIFA's deal, or probably tried to cut more of a negotiation there, had they not had deals with all individual teams, players, and stadiums already anyway. And I say that because I think there were one or two football games that came out that did not have access to the NFL players, because the NFL sort of controls all of the team likenesses and everything. When you deal with the NFL in the games industry with licenses, if you want to say like work with the Patriots team, both Justin and I are from New England, so I'll go there. The Patriots team, you don't go to like Kraft and talk to Kraft. You go to the NFL and talk to the NFL. Everything is sort of licensed through them for consistency's sake or whatever. That's not how it appears to work with FIFA and the different soccer clubs and leagues that are kind of involved. So EA sort of is like, yeah, fine, go ahead. We don't really lose that. We lose the World Cup name and we lose the FIFA brand. Outside of that, we have access to being able to specifically call out all the other leagues and brands and whatever, and that's what people normally care about. The
Plus
reason I was
campaign modes and whatever else that actually build up to make a game that's just not, people playing on the field. It's playing on the field plus all the additional stuff.
yeah, and the simulation of like management and everything.
Yes, yeah.
League management. Yeah. Whereas, so like what we saw with the NFL was when you couldn't deal with those players, you couldn't show actual real life players, no one cared about the game. Like I think we had one or two games where people were trying to do fake players and just rely on the rules of the game as something that would attract people to play it, and it didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean there is a give and take where it's like an amount of licensing and branding needs to happen, but I'm not sure for for soccer that the World Cup brand is the most important. More like I can play as my home team that I care about, like the amount of home team passion amongst the rest of the world who actually plays soccer. Like it's their teams that matter to them, and maybe like a handful of core pet players that they may respect or care about or follow from a team across the world. So. And as long as EA has all that, I think FIFA might be putting a little bit too much weight into the the value of their brand, at least for video games.
That's what I was going to say. This is going to, in this, we're going to be to see whether it's what you said, right? Like people are following their teams and following their favorite players, or do they actually mostly care about the FIFA name?
Right. I mean, and clearly, like, there's still a handful of soccer-based games out there, specifically from like Konami. I think Winning 11 is a soccer-based game. Like, FIFA, I'd be really hard-pressed to think that FIFA, A, is going to be able to find a developer that's going to produce a popular enough soccer football game.
To challenge EA on this?
To challenge EA. And one that would be willing to pay $1 billion over a 4-year period.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know what FIFA's play is here, but I think they overplayed their hand, and now they're going to have to take less money to kind of try to build a competing game that carries the FIFA name.
Well, to be clear, it won't necessarily be that some other company has to pay $1 billion for the FIFA brand. What I'm not sure of, and the reason I say that is because I think it may be that FIFA was asking for $1 billion for a deal that included exclusivity.
So yeah, I mean, it's possible. Either way, the question is whether or not FIFA will be able to pull in the same amount of money for their World Cup branding.
Right.
And I'm not sure they can. There's not a whole, like I said, like there's not a whole lot of competitors. Like I'd see it more likely that maybe there's a handful of mobile games that want to come out that are going to carry the FIFA branding. And then maybe Winning 11 is able to pick it up and pay towards
winning FIFA.
Yeah, right, whatever it's going to be called. So I don't know. I mean, maybe in the long term it will pay off and be more lucrative for FIFA as they can pull in, especially in like the mobile space, get extra branding from there, but
probably try to create or tap into, if it already exists, some sort of what is that league that people like? A fantasy football, fantasy soccer, effectively. and have it like you play your sim game, and then your players, you win some points there, and then based on actual games it does something else, right? Like and actually hooks into that. Like it's interesting stuff you can do on mobile with real-time stuff at if you're especially in mostly Europe or other continents where you can actually go to football games and maybe do something tied in there. Bring your mobile phone and
I
play
mean,
it.
I think it's going to be more of a fast cash in more than anything else. Throw on the branding, get some
Yeah,
clout to your game, and you know,
yeah. I'm giving them too much credit on the creativity aspect.
yeah, mobile games are no longer a place where there's that much creativity.
Right. Yeah.
And I apologize if you're
A mobile
a
developer who's
developer that
creative.
actually is caring about creating some innovative design, but at this point, it's just like,
Yeah, the big titles, the ones where that are boosting the sales numbers that suggest that the mobile industry is like what it's like 30 billion, whatever, some huge massive market. And you look at the games that make up the majority of sales numbers in that, they're all like sort of one note
yeah, I mean,
whale fishing titles.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep. All right, well, let's move on to the last topic.
Sweet.
This has to do with Xbox DRM,
Yep.
specifically on the Xbox Series. The story behind this is that this past weekend there was some kind of Xbox Live outage. I don't think it aligned with a an update, but it was basically one of their servers that handles verification of content on Xbox had some sort of outage. Xbox Live didn't go down. Well, I guess like mincing it's not worth doing it. But okay, Xbox Live, there's some sort of server outage. There was issues across the board. I think the biggest complaints were coming from people who played Fortnite. But with this outage, a lot of people lost the ability to play games. The important thing of note here is that in all the noise of, hey, Xbox down, what's going on here, some people started saying, hey, I don't have access to the game I own. And that followed with a lot of, well, okay, like, considering how Xbox handles DRM, is it this, is it that, is it that? But what it comes down to is there's a couple of known cases in which DRM affects your ability to play a game. What got affected was a unknown scenario in which you own a digital game, you wholly own it. You wholly own the rights to use it, and it works in offline mode. You should be able to play it in offline, but because of the outage, people were being not allowed to. They weren't allowed to play a handful of games that had otherwise thought to have had no DRM. The interesting thing about this is that because it fit into no known categories, people are like, hey, wait a second. Microsoft got pinned down during the Xbox One era for having offline mode games that would need to connect online to validate and be able to play them. So what's going on here? And it really exposed that even though there's no DRM, there really are DRM checks that are happening. And when the server went offline, people who had purchased an offline game, but it was a digital version of it, was failing the DRM checks and rejecting owners from being able to play it. I think the important thing of note here is that if you buy a digital title, you do not own the game. You own the license to play the game, period. And that's the same thing with music and movies and everything else. If you do not own the physical media, you only own the right to use that content, and that's it.
So technically that's also true of the physical media.
Yeah, I mean to some degree,
Like
right?
technically, no, actually, based on the contract, if you look at a CD insert, it says like along with this CD, you have the you are licensed to play it in front of. I think in some of them it's like up to 10 people. Like they will literally
some
limit
stupid arbitrary rules that are like, yeah, you can only let it be heard by so many people. But
movies, for instance, they remember a little VHS. They always had that warning and the FBI warning. That was because you were only licensed to show it, to view it like the tape cassette only came with a license to be shown. It's not like you owned the movie and whatever ownership means in that case, right? Your ownership was included the ability to play it. That was effectively,
Yes.
and it had limitations. So this is sort of like a more strict version of that, because you
Well, especially in the digital content, it's like,
yeah.
you may have downloaded the bits onto your hard drive that allow you to play the game.
Yep.
But in the case of digital content that's only digital, you are granted access to run that game. And although you could probably mince words and say, well, that's technically true with the physical media as well. You physically own the media on the disc and they can't take that away from you, but they could revoke your ability to play it like using online or some other method. With Sony, we know that as far as we know, that's not true.
No,
If you own the physical media, whichever console you play it on, you have access to play that game unless it's an online only game that like requires it to validate online.
there are exceptions. So for both Microsoft and Sony, they offer, or there are examples, I believe, where you buy a physical disc, and the physical disc has nothing on it but the license. And when you put the disc into your console, it says, "Great, you have purchased this license. I need to now download the game," and it will download it from the store, the same way as other stuff. So there is that. Like you don't actually have any of the game bits on the disc, which is sort of a confusing situation to be in. So there's one where this can go wrong. The second one is when you're trying to play. There are two ways that this can go bad with physical media. The first one is, I have an Xbox One game. I'm going to put it in my series title. In order for backwards compatibility to work, it has to download a little bit of a configuration setup to make sure that everything is working correctly. Without that step, I may not be able to actually run it. Right.
Yeah,
So Microsoft still
it's
has to.
more the case, especially with Xbox, Xbox 360 and anything before that, which do not run on the console. Period.
They have to emulate.
Yeah, they emulate and they run things via cloud. So without an online connection, there's a very little chance that you actually have a form of backward compatibility that will work. Offline.
I'm pretty sure that 360 games can work on an offline console. You just have to download a specific game targeted kind of virtual machine environment.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that the disk itself does not run anything.
Oh, true. Yeah.
So in an offline mode, and you have the disk, it's like there's a chance that it won't. I don't know exactly what this situation is, that if you download, that doesn't need to connect online and validate for you to play it. But I think with most games that are digital, you need an Xbox Live connection to validate before you can play it.
The one other scenario that could happen, I don't think we've seen an example of this because no one's gone as egregious as to require this. Like, whoops, the console manufacturers entirely have the ability in their firmware to lock out specific titles. Like, you have the physical media, it's there, it will run, but you update your console to a specific point and it will not run it. Because it's been
we see this with PS4 backwards compatibility mode. There are a handful of titles that will not run on the PS5 because the backwards compatibility doesn't work correctly. So, Sony specifically blacklists those handful of games until either a future patch or indefinitely.
Right. And what I'm saying is that even if like a PS5 game could be presumably blacklisted, no one's gone there. I don't know of a single case in history where that's happened on any console so far. Usually people like that type of blacklist would be so devastating as to get everybody involved in the making of the game sort of put on a blacklist and have repercussions throughout a lot of stuff. So no one wants to go there, but it is possible. As just another thing to be careful of. Sony's all games on PlayStation are DRM locked. 100%. 100%. And on Switch and on everything. Like if you pull out a hard drive from a PlayStation and you put it into a PC or a Mac, you can look at the files. They're garbage. They're generally encoded and encrypted because they're encoded with DRM. And
Not
in
only
order,
that, I mean, you take a PlayStation 4 hard drive out.
yep,
PlayStation 5
harder with the
yeah.
SSD.
Well, because it's on the board at this point, unless it's an
Well, you can
external
still
one.
have the external. Yeah, you have the slot in
Yeah, but in the
drive.
case of a PS4, where your only
It's
hard drive
easy.
was a removable hard drive, that if you
Yeah.
took that PS4 hard drive out and put it in another PS4, and
Yep.
that other PS4 belonged to someone else, the content on that hard drive would not be playable by that person.
That's right. Yep.
So, like, yeah, there's DRM that's working across the board, and they use online validation in a lot of cases to validate it. Now, I think the situation that is usually the case is that if the console is set to be yours and offline, your digital content that does not require an online connection or your physical media that's used in it should not have any issue playing regardless. Right? And that's been pretty consistently true. The weird thing is that I guess people got really upset about was that whatever had happened on this Xbox Live validation server was that it was now invalidating that and basically not agreeing that the console had any right to use any of the digital content that had been downloaded on it, even if it was owned and set to a home console for that user. So there's some
Yeah.
sort of configuration issue or some sort of server outage that caused a major issue. I think people are sort of like we're beginning to say, "Hey, this is the same thing that Microsoft said before."
Yeah. With the
But
Xbox One.
right, but how is this different and how is it the same?
Yeah. Well, so it's different for a number of reasons. The the Xbox One, which never actually did this was their announcement,
Mm-hmm.
which was very weird. But like the benefit for the Xbox One era was that they were going to try to make it so like, look, yes, the Xbox One is always online. You have to authenticate in order to play anything. The games are tied to your account.
Yeah.
What that enables is games resale, and you could sell with certain retailers. So like Microsoft said, look, yes, it's a burden that you're going to have to be online, but the benefit that you get out of this is you'll be able to resell your games. And the nice thing for the reason this was a sale to the games industry is because it cuts out basically GameStop. Basically, you'd still in this future world be able to, or this alternate universe, I guess, still be able to sell through GameStop. They would just get less of a cut because presumably that resale would also feed some of the money back to the developer.
Yeah, or the publisher
Or
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, good point. Now, none of this happened because everyone threw up the example of like, well, what happens if my internet goes out? Or what happens if I'm like in a place with really crappy, slow internet, or I go to a place that has literally no internet and I want to bring my console.
I want to lend you my disc. Like that was made impossible by this
Right.
by this type of DRM.
Yep, you just can't do it. I'm like, oh, okay, great, thanks. So they're just like throwing out all these little babies with this bathwater. And Microsoft reneged after lots and lots of bad press back in 2013. And went back to a sort of the standard model. That memory has been seared into the minds of many Xbox fans, however, though, and you know, games industry fans from that era. And so this smacks of it. This is sort of like, well, if Microsoft servers ever went down, no one would play games. You just could not play games in that world. And for the people who are like, yeah, I bought that game, why is my system telling me I can't play that game now? The difference here appears to be like the Windows Central folks did a little bit of research on this, and it seems as though what may have happened is the DRM verification servers went down, and if you tried to play a certain game for the first time that you had owned, that the one-time DRM check to make sure that you could play the game on your console would fail. And that was the situation that happened. So this probably could have all very much been cleared up by Microsoft saying, you know, on their game list, like having a little X or question mark next to the game when you're in your account to say, you know, are you verified to have this or not? And just a little state flag that says verified owner can play, you know, needs verification, ready to play, something like that, just some flag. Then a user could have said, oh, I can't play this game because it's not verified, but I can play this other game. So that's fine. Okay, it must be Microsoft service is down or something like that. And they have an error that says we can't reach the verification servers. Like even something like that would have been enough. But Microsoft had a very confusing message in their log. And it was about like this account is not validated, which that's not necessarily true. The truth of the matter was it could not reach the servers, or the servers were malfunctioning,
Right.
And reporting the incorrect data. So, you know, it's different in that this is supposed to be working as we all expect it to, but Microsoft failed in the service failed for a brief period. There was an outage, and their errors reports were not helpful, let's say, in this situation.
Yeah, or misleading at the very least. And I think it comes down to the fact that there's a bunch of different enumerations of how Xbox Live can fail to validate a game.
Yes.
And they don't have the amount of error messages that handle that, system side error messages that handle that, which will probably now be addressed in a patch.
Hopefully.
Yeah. I think there still is a larger question. I think this is one, at least for people who appreciate great game preservation, which is like,
yeah,
how in an unlikely situation, which say Xbox fails and they shut down the system, and in the year 2028, and now Microsoft has sunset its entire Xbox Live service.
Gone.
Yeah, like what content would I have access to? And it's unclear. And it's really up to the political will of the company to do the right thing, which is not a guarantee. Like in the case of Sony, which had the CMOS issue, basically if the battery died on a
PS4.
PlayStation,
yeah,
PS4 or PS3, it actually happened on both. It would basically, I think the calendar date would get messed up, and it would not be able to validate the game disc that you owned. So you'd put a game disc in your PS3, and it would fail to pass the minimum authentication on the system to let you play it. In both cases, on the PS3 and PS4, I think they patched both to say, yeah, actually this is fine. It's an error that's not supposed to happen, and now I can work around it. But that again was due to the political will of PlayStation to say, okay, we're going to make this fixed, and it's not going to be an issue that is going to cause people who, I don't know, have a dead CMOS battery in their PS4 from being able to play the games that they own. So I think there's real concern about, okay, in some unlikely but plausible future, how is it that us owners who own, a connected console with a bunch of games are guaranteed to be able to continue to play that game? And I think the real answer is like, there's not really a guarantee. It's like the way these consoles function is that you have to pass a minimum DRM verification. If that fails for whatever reason, because servers are offline or the system that it needs to check against no longer works, like unless they've patched the console to fix that, like there are scenarios in the future where a console may be rendered useless, and the games that you own for that console are rendered useless as well.
Right. Yeah, this is a constant. You mentioned it before, the game preservation, folks. This is a constant concern. And there's similar for all online titles, online only, where, once for beloved old games that you had to pay a subscription fee for or whatnot because, someone had to maintain a server somewhere. MMOs are a lot of these. What happens when the company running it decides, nah, we're done? Like, is that it? Is it just a flash in the pan and no one can ever experience it again? That's a big. And I
think that's
concern.
Likely going to be the case for more modern games. I think for some of the older games, like I think PSO and Diablo and things like that, which lost like network connection some time ago, they had basically the gamer population on PC at least end up stand up servers that would allow it to still function.
Yeah.
But the methods to make this work, especially on consoles in the future, is probably too onerous that for every game that there would be some sort of workaround that people stand up their own servers. I think in the future it's like, PS4 games, it's going to be up to Sony to make sure that these things still operate. And if they shut down a server for an online only game, like I don't know, like what is it like Last of Us factions,
Sure.
like once that server goes down, it's done. And I think they've already done that for like Uncharted 3, where they had their online components. Like I don't think that's accessible anymore.
I think it was it like Ubisoft recently was announced that they were going to be shutting down their online services and something like Uplay or something like whatever their service is for a whole bunch of old
Mm-hmm.
games. And what was surprising to everyone is that the servers were still up and running and accepting connections for games that came out in like 2002,
Yeah.
2001. People were like that still works. Like,
Like there's
wow.
some
Jeez.
server room that they just kind of forgot about that was still
It's
running
just
it.
sitting there waiting for
Yeah.
connections. Yeah,
And
apparently.
there's
And
one guy in the IT going like,
it
server's still running. All
yeah,
right, good.
yeah.
I don't have to do like a blade swap or something.
Yeah, someone making a sweet someone at Ubisoft finally looked at their engineering staff and said, "Who's this one person at IT making six figures? Just like what do they do?" And found
Maintaining
that
like
they,
100
they
titles that go back to 2002. Yeah.
yeah, and then literally like every once a week you'd have to look at the thing and be like, "Yep, still running,"
Yeah.
and drawing a huge salary. Good times. But yeah, no, they were like 15 or something, 15 games or something ridiculous like that were going to be suddenly removed
Yeah.
from down. But it's because it's a cost, right? I mean, and if the game publishers or game creators don't open source that software, then or at least distribute a server executable to run this, then it's gone. There's no way you can play the single player campaign for some of these games, but you won't be able to connect and play a
Right.
multiplayer system.
Right.
Which,
And it's like the sad reality of where we're at. It's going to take
yep.
like even more monumental lifting of the game preservation groups out there that are, you know, making sure that PS2 games run on PCs right now. That
Yep.
like it's only going to get harder if they want to, especially if they want to make online only games function. 10 years past their due date.
That's
So
right. I got to say, as someone who usually buys physical media so that I can, to guard against that inevitable future when everything is digital and if the services go down, that's it. Um, I like to have that physical media for that purpose, but I have to say, even for me, like I'm slowly starting to get tired of it because of the ultimate laziness that occurs when you're sitting down at a game and someone pops up and says, "Hey, I'm online. Do you want to play the game?" And you're sitting there and you're like, "Yes, but I have to get up and eject the disc and put in a different one."
yeah.
Like, instead of just hitting the button and switching the game and hitting X, like, oh, it's just too much effort.
Also, there's a special type of entitlement for
Oh
people
yeah,
who actually have the ability to maintain massive libraries of games and
yes,
carrying it around with them. I think for most people, the reality is, yeah, you're gonna move in an apartment that's small. Uh, those apartments don't have room for your back collection all the way to the Atari 2600. And you either are renting a storage locker to handle that, or you have a sizable home that allows you to
to have a
have a
attic or a basement where you can stick all that stuff.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
or
I long rejected that, like, what was it, 2008, where I was just like, all right, my collection going back
downsizing.
is gone.
Yeah.
I was off by about 10 years. If I had held on for about 10 years longer, I think the value of that collection probably would have been, you know,
Much higher.
20, 30x what I probably sold it for.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's a gamble. You never know about that stuff.
yeah,
Um, yeah. There's one other class of person who would have like the museum style library. Like they have literally shelves in some, like, instead of books on shelves where they have like a library, they just have games and occasional like televisions that are capable of running the old consoles.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Cool.
I think that covers the content for this week.
Yep.
If you enjoyed the content that we gave you this week, please like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitch. Like and subscribe on Facebook or on YouTube. It really helps us out and shows that there's some interest in the content that we make. But every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time is when we tend to go live. So follow us along. We hope to see you next week.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right.